We all know the story of Lazarus, the man Jesus brought back from the dead. But have you ever wondered what happened in those 4 days while his body lay in a dark tomb? Why did Jesus purposely wait until it was too late to arrive? Today, we're looking at the hidden details of this miracle that changed the course of history forever. Before we get to the tomb, before we get to the tears, before we get to that earth-shattering moment when a dead man walked out of the darkness, we need to understand who Lazarus was. Because this wasn't just a random miracle performed for strangers. This was deeply, uncomfortably personal. Lazarus lived in Bethany, a small village perched on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives, just about 2 miles outside Jerusalem. 2 miles. That's a short walk. A detail that matters more than it seems. He had 2 sisters, Mary and Martha. If you've spent any time in the Gospels, you know these women. Martha is the one who couldn't sit still, who needed everything done, who once complained to Jesus that her sister wasn't helping in the kitchen. Mary is the one who sat at Jesus' feet, hanging on every word, who would later pour expensive perfume on his feet and wipe them with her hair. These were not peripheral characters. These were close friends. And the Gospel of John tells us something striking. It says, and I want you to feel the weight of this, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Not admired. Not respected. Loved. The Son of God had a friend group. He had people he visited, people he laughed with, people whose home he walked into and felt at rest. That is the foundation of this story. Because what's about to happen is not a distant theological transaction. It's a miracle born out of love. And love, real love, makes the stakes infinitely higher. The crisis begins simply enough. Lazarus gets sick. We don't know what illness it was. The text doesn't tell us. What we know is that it was serious enough for the sisters to send word to Jesus. And notice how they phrase the message. They don't say, "Please come and heal him." They don't give instructions. They simply say, "Lord, the one you love is sick." That's it. They trust the relationship to do the rest. They're not commanding. They're not bargaining. They're just saying, "You love him. You know what to do." Now, Jesus was not in Bethany at this time. He was across the Jordan River, in a region called Perea, because things had gotten dangerous in and around Jerusalem. The religious leaders were actively looking for a reason to arrest him. His disciples had warned him, just weeks before, they tried to stone you there. You want to go back? So when the message arrives, you might expect Jesus to drop everything and rush to his friend's side. That's what you do when someone you love is in danger. You go. You go immediately. But he doesn't. John 11 verse 6 records one of the most startling sentences in the entire New Testament. It says, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Read that again. He stayed where he was. 2 more days. Now before we judge him, before we assume he was cold or indifferent, John tells us something else in the same breath. He says, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Jesus knew something the sisters didn't. He wasn't abandoning his friend. He was arranging something that would echo through eternity. But imagine being Mary and Martha in those 2 days. Sending a message and getting silence. Watching your brother get worse. Checking the door. Checking the road. Wondering why he hasn't come. When you love someone and they're in pain and the one person who could help them is somewhere out there, not coming, that silence can feel like betrayal. That silence has a purpose. But when you're inside it, you can't see it. After 2 days, Jesus announces it's time to go. And his disciples are alarmed. They say to him, "Rabbi, a short while ago the Jews that tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?" They're not being cowardly. They're being practical. Jerusalem is a death trap right now. Going back to the vicinity of the city means walking into the lion's den. This is not a casual road trip. Jesus gives them an answer about walking in the light, about not stumbling in the dark, and then he says it plainly, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." The disciples misunderstand. They think he means Lazarus is literally resting and will get better on his own. They say, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." They're relieved. If he's just sleeping, maybe we don't need to go into danger after all. But Jesus tells them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Dead. And then, this is one of the most remarkable things he says in this account. He adds, "And for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe." Glad. He used the word glad. Not glad that Lazarus suffered. Not glad that Mary and Martha were crushed. But glad that the stage was being set for something so undeniable, so impossible, that it would forge the kind of faith in his disciples that could not be shaken. Thomas, the one we call the doubter, though I think that nickname does him a disservice, says something extraordinary here. He says, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." He's not convinced they'll survive this trip. But he's going anyway. That's not doubt. That's grim courage. So they go. They travel the road toward Bethany, toward Jerusalem, toward danger, carrying the knowledge that their friend is dead, and that their teacher has something impossible in mind. By the time Jesus arrives at Bethany, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. 4 days. This is not an accidental detail. This is a theological stake driven into the ground. In Jewish tradition at the time, there was a widespread belief, not scripture, but popular belief, that the soul of a deceased person hovered near the body for 3 days after death, hoping to return. After 3 days, it was believed, the soul finally departed because the body had begun to decay beyond recognition. 3 days. That was the threshold. That was when death became final, irreversible, and undeniable. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. The body was already in a state of decomposition. Martha herself would confirm this when Jesus asks for the stone to be rolled away. She says, "Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." This is a woman who loved her brother, saying, "Don't open that tomb. It's too late. It's been too long." This is important because it removes every possible out. No one could claim Lazarus was in a coma. No one could suggest he'd been revived naturally, or that the death had been exaggerated. 4 days. The smell was already there. The grief was absolute. The situation was medically, physically, culturally, and by every conceivable standard, over. Jesus waited until it was over. He waited until there was no doubt, no ambiguity, no possible explanation other than the one he was about to provide. This is how God often works. Not before the crisis peaks. Not at the moment of maximum anxiety. But after. After it looks finished. After the options have run out. After the mourners have arrived and the plans have changed and hope itself has been buried alongside the body. He waits for the moment when the miracle can be undeniable. When Jesus arrives, Martha hears he's coming and goes out to meet him on the road. Mary stays in the house. This tells you something about the two sisters. Martha, the doer, the one who can't stay still, she goes out. She has things to say. And what she says is breathtaking in its raw honesty. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." That's grief and faith colliding in one sentence. She's not attacking Jesus. She still believes in his power. But she's expressing what she's been feeling for 4 days. You could have been here. You weren't. He died. Those facts sit next to each other uncomfortably, and she's not willing to pretend they don't. But then, and this is Martha doing something remarkable, she doesn't stop there. She adds, "But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Even now. Even after 4 days. Even after the smell. Even after the funeral. Even now. She doesn't know what she's saying. She doesn't fully understand what even now is about to mean. But she's making a declaration of faith in the dark, without knowing what it will produce. That is one of the purest forms of trust, when you say, I believe, you can still do something without having any idea what that something looks like. Jesus responds with what has become one of the most profound declarations in all of religious history. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. And then he asks her, do you believe this? He's not asking her to understand the theology. He's asking her, personally, pointedly, do you believe this about me? Right now? In this moment? With your brother 4 days dead? Do you believe I am who I say I am? Martha says yes. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. It is one of the great confessions of faith in the New Testament. And it happens not in a moment of triumph, not on a mountaintop, not after a miracle. It happens on a dusty road, with grief still wet on her face, with her brother still in the tomb. Martha goes back to call her sister. She whispers to Mary, the teacher is here and is asking for you. And Mary gets up quickly and goes out. The mourners who were with her in the house follow her, assuming she's going to the tomb to weep. They follow because grief has its own gravity. It pulls people together. When Mary reaches Jesus, she falls at his feet. Notice, this is the same posture she was in when she sat at his feet listening to him teach. In joy and in sorrow, she comes to him the same way. And she says exactly what Martha said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Same words. Same wound. These sisters had probably said this to each other across those 4 days of waiting. If he had only come. If only he had been here. When Jesus sees her weeping, and sees the mourners weeping around her, the text says he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. The original Greek here is intense. The word used, embermeomai, suggests not just sadness but an inward groaning, almost an anguish, a visceral disturbance. He asks where they have laid Lazarus. They say, come and see, Lord. And then the shortest verse in the entire Bible. 11 words in English. In Greek, just 2 words. Jesus wept. He wept. The creator of the cosmos wept. The one who made the eyes that produce tears used those same eyes to shed them. The one who had already told his disciples that Lazarus would be raised, who knew exactly what was about to happen, still wept. Why? Some have suggested he wept because of their unbelief. Others say he wept because he was entering into their pain. The mourners standing there said, see how he loved him. They read his tears as grief. And maybe they were right. Maybe knowing the outcome doesn't make the present suffering any less real to witness. Maybe love means being willing to be broken open by someone else's pain even when you hold the answer to it. He could have arrived smiling. He could have said, don't worry, watch this. But he didn't. He cried first. He entered the grief before he ended it. That matters. That tells us something about the character of God that no theology textbook fully captures. He is not untouched by what you go through. He does not watch from a distance with crossed arms and divine detachment. He comes to where you are. And he weeps with you. Before he moves mountains, he sits in the rubble with you first. They come to the tomb. It is a cave with a stone across the entrance, the standard burial style of the era. The stone is there not just for practical reasons but as a symbol. Sealed. Final. Done. Jesus says, take away the stone. Martha, ever practical, says what any grieving sister would say, but, Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. She's trying to protect everyone from what's behind that stone. She's trying to protect the dignity of what remains. She's also, perhaps, protecting herself from having to see it. Jesus gently reminds her, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? The stone is rolled away. And then Jesus does something interesting. He looks up and prays. Out loud. Not because he needs to, he makes clear that he knows the Father always hears him. He prays out loud for the benefit of the people standing there, so that they would understand this is not a magic trick. This is not sorcery. This is the Son of God, working in perfect communion with the Father, about to demonstrate something that has never been demonstrated in quite this way before. He finishes the prayer. And then he cries out, not in a whisper, not in a murmur, but in a loud voice that the crowd can hear, "Lazarus, come out." Now here is something the theologians have noted and even joked about across the centuries. Augustine of Hippo once observed that Jesus had to call Lazarus by name, because if he had just said, "Come out," every dead person in the vicinity would have risen. That's how much power was in that command. "Lazarus, come out." And he came out, wrapped in burial cloths, his face covered with a cloth, shuffling from the darkness into the light. Still bound, still wrapped, but alive, breathing, present, standing there in front of a crowd that had gathered to mourn him, now too stunned to do anything but stare. Jesus says, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." There is something almost tender about that last instruction. Let him go. Not just unwrap him. Let him go, back to living, back to breathing, back to Mary and Martha, back to his life. The crowd erupts. Some believe. Some go straight to the Pharisees to report what they witnessed. And that report, that act of running to the authorities, would set in motion the events that would lead directly to the crucifixion of Jesus. The raising of Lazarus is the miracle that pushed the religious leaders past their tipping point. It is in the meeting called after this event that the high priest Caiaphas says those chilling words, "It is better for one man to die for the people than for the whole nation to perish. The death of one to spare the many." He meant it cynically, politically. But he was prophesying without knowing it. The resurrection of Lazarus casts its shadow directly forward, to another tomb, to another stone rolled away, to another man walking out of the darkness. Except that time, there would be no one waiting outside to give the command. He would come out on his own. So let's bring this home. Because this story is not just history. It is not just a record of a miracle that happened in a village outside Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. It speaks to something that is happening right now in your life. Have you been in a 4-day moment? You know what I mean. That place where the thing you were hoping for has been dead long enough that the smell is there. Long enough that the mourners have arrived. Long enough that the stone has been rolled over it, and everyone, including, maybe, yourself, has accepted that it's over. A relationship. A dream. A business. A calling. A season of your life that you buried because you had no choice. And you prayed. You sent the message. Lord, the one you love is sick. And there was silence. And the thing died. And now it's been 4 days. Here's what I want you to hold on to from this story. Jesus did not arrive late. He arrived exactly when he needed to. Not early, because then it would have looked like a close call. Not on time, because then it would have looked like clever timing. He arrived after 4 days because he needed there to be absolutely no question about what had happened and what he was about to do. The delay was not distance. It was design. When Jesus wept at the tomb, he showed us that he is not indifferent to the 4-day moments. He doesn't look at your dead dreams and shrug. He enters the grief. He sits in it with you. And then he speaks. And when he speaks, things that have been dead, things that have been dead long enough that people have stopped hoping, come out of the tomb. Mary and Martha did not understand the 2-day delay. They could not see from inside the silence what was being arranged on the other side of it. But when they saw Lazarus walk out of that cave, every single moment of the wait, every tear, every unanswered prayer, every hour of wondering where he was, made sense. Not because the pain hadn't been real, but because what came after made the pain mean something. There is a profound spiritual principle buried in this story. God often lets things die before he resurrects them. Not because he is cruel. Not because he forgot. But because resurrection requires death. You cannot raise something that is not dead. And sometimes the most powerful thing he can do for you is to let a chapter close so completely, so irreversibly, or so it seems, that when he reopens it, there is no explanation but him. Think about the people standing outside that tomb. They had come to grieve. They would leave having witnessed something they could not explain, could not deny, and could not forget. The very thing they thought was over became the greatest evidence of God's power they would ever see in their lives. Their grief became the stage for His glory. Your 4-day moment may be the same. I want to talk about what I call the Lazarus principle, because I think there's a pattern here that appears over and over in Scripture and in life. The pattern is this: God's greatest miracles happen past the point of human possibility. Abraham and Sarah had a child when Abraham was 100 years old. Past the point of human possibility. Moses parted the Red Sea when the Egyptian army was closing in from behind and a wall of water blocked the way forward. Past the point of human possibility. David, a shepherd boy, stood before a giant that trained soldiers had refused to fight. Joseph sat in a prison cell for years after his prophetic dreams had seemingly been mocked and buried. The disciples cowered in an upper room after the crucifixion, hiding behind locked doors, convinced that everything was over. And then morning came. God seems to have a particular affection for doing what cannot be done, for arriving when there is no other explanation left, for rolling away stones that were supposed to stay shut. Not because He enjoys letting His people suffer, but because in those moments, the glory is undivided. There is no part of the story that can be attributed to good luck, good timing, or human ingenuity. When Lazarus walks out of that tomb on day 4, nobody says, well, perhaps it wasn't as serious as they thought. Nobody says, maybe the doctors were wrong. The evidence is unambiguous. This is also why the faith He asks of us is not the easy kind. He doesn't ask Martha, do you believe I could have healed him if I'd arrived on time? He asks her, do you believe I am the resurrection and the life? Do you believe the impossible is still possible? Do you believe the story isn't over even when it looks finished? That is a different kind of faith. That is the faith that can stare at a stone-sealed tomb and say, even now. And here is the other side of that principle. Lazarus had to do something too. He had to respond to the voice. He had to get up. He had to move toward the light, still wrapped in grave clothes, still bound, probably still blinking in disbelief. He didn't walk out of that tomb fully free. He walked out still wrapped in the garments of death. And then others helped unwrap him. Sometimes the miracle comes before the freedom. Sometimes God raises you from what was killing you, and the unwrapping, the healing of the wounds, the removal of the old mindsets, the untangling of the grave clothes, that happens after, with the help of community, with the help of people who say, let me help you take those off. You don't have to be fully free to be raised. You just have to answer when He calls your name. There is one more thing I want to sit with before we close. Jesus called Lazarus by name. Not dead man, come out. Not whoever is in that tomb. He said, Lazarus, come out. In the middle of the darkness, in the middle of the grave clothes, in the middle of 4 days of death, he heard his name. There is something extraordinary about being called by name. Your name is the most personal sound in the world to you. It is the sound that wakes you from sleep. It is the sound that turns your head in a crowded room. When someone who knows you, really knows you, says your name, it carries weight that no title or description can match. And Jesus, standing outside the tomb, uses it. This is not incidental. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus calls people by name at the moments that matter most. He calls Simon by the name Peter, the rock, at the moment he's about to define his destiny. He calls Zacchaeus by name before the man has even introduced himself. He says Mary to a woman weeping outside another tomb, and in that one word, in her name spoken by a familiar voice, she recognizes the risen Christ. Your name is known. Whatever tomb you're in, whatever darkness has surrounded you, whatever silence has stretched on for 2 days or 4 days or 4 years, your name is known. And the same voice that split the silence outside Lazarus' tomb is the voice that is still speaking today. That voice doesn't just heal. It raises the dead. It calls the gone back to the living. It walks into the aftermath of grief and loss and failure and says, I am the resurrection and the life. Not I was. Not I will be. I am present tense, right now, in this moment, on this day. Whatever you're carrying into this moment, whatever has been in the tomb long enough that you've started to accept it as lost, I want to leave you with this. He is the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? If you found value in this video, make sure you subscribe, because we go deep here. We don't just skim the surface of these stories. We dig into what they mean, what they cost, and what they're still saying to us today. Drop a comment below. What's your 4-day moment? The thing you've been waiting on, the thing that looks like it's over? I read every single one. And as always, keep going. Even when it's been 4 days.